Imagine one day, everything you thought was safe suddenly disappears. The banks you trusted, the money you saved, the homes you loved. In 2008, this became reality. The most powerful financial system on earth was brought to its knees. This is the story of how the world almost stopped and what it teaches us about money, trust, and the fragile empire of debt. In the early 2000s, America believed in endless growth. Homes could only rise in value. Banks could only make money. But beneath the shining towers of Wall Street, cracks were forming. Complex financial instruments, cheap credit, and risky bets built a system that looked stable but was secretly fragile. By September 2008, the cracks became a chasm. One giant bank failed, and panic spread across the world faster than anyone could imagine. This is not just a story about money, it's about human belief, risk, and the hidden architecture of collapse. The day the world almost stopped. It was the 15th of September, 2008. On the streets of New York, men and women in suits carried boxes out of a towering building with a name everyone once trusted, Lehman Brothers. Inside, the offices were empty, computers powered down, phones silent. What had been one of the largest banks in the world had just gone bankrupt. People outside whispered, shocked. They couldn't believe how quickly everything had fallen apart. Across the world, in London, Tokyo, and Reykjavik, traders stared at screens with wide eyes. Numbers were falling, flashing red, faster than anyone could count. In small American towns, families opened letters that began with the words, "Notice of foreclosure." Homes that once felt safe now seemed like fragile castles of sand. Suddenly, money wasn't just numbers, it was panic. The world felt like it was holding its breath. In the early 2000s, America believed in endless growth. People thought that buying a home was like planting a tree. It would only grow taller and stronger over time. Banks were happy to lend money, and mortgages became easier to get than ever before. Even families who didn't have much money were encouraged to buy houses, and the streets were filled with "for sale" signs. Everywhere, there was hope and excitement. Banks weren't just giving loans, they were creating a new kind of magic. Money flowed freely, interest rates were low, and everyone believed that the system was safe. Brokers smiled as they handed out papers, promising a future of prosperity. The economy was booming, and the world seemed unstoppable. But under this shiny surface, tiny cracks were forming. The more money was lent, the riskier the bets became, even if no one noticed yet. The moment everyone believed in the magic. By 2006, housing prices were climbing higher than ever. People believed they could never lose money in real estate. Wall Street saw an opportunity. Take all these home loans, bundle them into complicated packages called mortgage-backed securities, MBS, and sell them to investors around the world. Everyone seemed to be winning: homeowners, banks, investors, brokers. Money was flowing everywhere. Banks created even riskier packages called collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. These were like layered cakes of debt, where one tiny failure could hide inside many layers. Rating agencies gave them top grades, saying they were safe. People trusted these grades, but behind the numbers, many of these loans were subprime, made to people who might not be able to pay them back. Still, the party continued. Wall Street celebrated, Bonuses grew, and confidence soared. The system was fragile, even if no one realized it. Banks were borrowing huge amounts of money to make bigger profits, sometimes 30 times what they had in actual cash. This is called leverage. If everything went right, they could make millions. But if just a few loans failed, the whole structure could collapse like a house of cards. Behind the glittering towers, the financial world was a web of hidden risks. Insurance companies like AIG made bets to protect these risky loans, called credit default swaps. But these bets were so big and complicated that no one really understood how much danger they carried. If one company failed, it could ripple through the entire world. It was like building a skyscraper on sand, and no one knew which grain would give way first. Then, the first dominoes fall. In 2007, things started to wobble. People who had borrowed money for homes began missing payments. Banks started to feel the strain. 2 hedge funds at Stearns collapsed, signaling trouble. The government stepped in quietly to prevent panic, but cracks were spreading. By early 2008, even big institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac needed help, and whispers of disaster traveled through the corridors of power. Despite warnings, many people still believed the system was strong. Banks kept lending, investors kept buying, but the dominoes were lined up, and one by one, they were about to fall. The world was calm on the surface, but underneath, tension grew like a storm gathering over a city. Then, the big Lehman falls. Then came September 2008. Lehman Brothers, a giant among banks, filed for bankruptcy. Panic spread instantly. Money markets froze. Banks stopped trusting each other. Investors rushed to pull out cash. Stock markets around the world fell like dominoes. Families watched as their savings and retirement accounts shrank overnight. It was chaos. Businesses couldn't get short-term loans. Some closed. People lost jobs. Homes were foreclosed. The government acted, injecting money into the system, but the damage had been done. The invisible thread of confidence that held the financial world together had snapped. Suddenly, the entire global economy felt fragile, as if one more step could bring it all crashing down. Another lessons learned from history. The 2008 crash wasn't random. Similar patterns had happened before. Tulip mania, the 1929 crash, and the dot-com bubble. The same story repeated. Cheap credit, rising prices, overconfidence, hidden risks, and a sudden trigger that caused panic. The system looked stable until it wasn't. People trusted complex formulas more than common sense. The lesson is simple but powerful. Human belief drives economies. Confidence, trust, and hope make money move. When those disappear, even the largest banks and richest investors can fail. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's the faith of millions that holds the world together. Before Lehman, Stearns had already teetered on the edge. In March 2008, 2 of its hedge funds failed due to bad mortgages. The bank struggled to stay afloat. Panic spread among investors. The government intervened with an emergency sale to prevent a total collapse. It was a warning. Even giants could fall if their foundations were weak. Inside Stearns, traders worked frantically. Calls were made. Deals were signed. But outside, the world didn't know how close the edge had come. Confidence was fragile. and one mistake could bring chaos. This was the first sign that the empire of debt was not infinite. The U.S. government stepped in for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. By summer 2008, the government had to take over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two giants that guaranteed much of America's mortgages. Their collapse could have wiped out trillions in savings. Families, banks, and investors all relied on them, but the shadow of risky loans grew too big. Inside, officials worked day and night. Emergency plans were made. Markets were nervous, but some confidence returned temporarily. Still, the system was like a wounded animal. It could not recover easily. The stage was set for the ultimate shock, one that would reach every corner of the globe. Then, the inevitable happened. Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy. The financial world trembled, credit froze, and panic became contagious. Investors rushed to sell, and banks stopped lending to one another. Stock markets plunged. People's homes, savings, and jobs were at risk. The invisible thread of trust snapped completely. Global panic spread. In Iceland, entire banks failed. In the U.S., unemployment rose. The fragile system, built on confidence and debt, was exposed. And yet, this was not the end. The world was about to see government rescues, bailouts, and the full human toll of the collapse. Then TARP came to rescue, a lifeline for banks. As Lehman Brothers fell, the U.S. government realized the system could not survive without intervention. Congress approved the TARP Troubled Asset Relief Program, a plan to buy bad loans from banks and inject trillions of dollars into the financial system. The goal was simple: stop the collapse and restore confidence. For ordinary people, this sounded confusing. Why give money to banks? They asked. But the truth was clear. If banks failed, people's savings, pensions, and jobs would vanish. Wall Street cheered the rescue, while Main Street watched skeptically. The lifeline was thrown, but the storm was far from over. The financial crisis was no longer just an American problem. In Europe, banks with exposure to U.S. mortgages trembled. Iceland's banks collapsed completely. Asia and South America saw markets crash. Money stopped moving like a frozen river, and global trade slowed. Confidence was gone. Families everywhere worried about their homes, jobs, and savings. Businesses that relied on credit couldn't pay suppliers. Factories slowed or closed. The world realized something terrifying. Even in a connected and modern economy, one failure could ripple across the globe. Poverty set in. The world became unemployed. As banks stabilized slightly, the human cost became visible. People lost jobs. Families lost homes. Retirement accounts shrank overnight. Cities faced rising unemployment and foreclosures. Anxiety became part of daily life. Children saw parents stressed. Communities struggled. Even those who kept jobs felt the pinch as the economy slowed. The lesson was harsh. Financial collapse is not just numbers. It is people's lives disrupted. The crisis revealed that money is trust, and when trust is broken, society suffers. Markets became a roller coaster. Stocks plummeted, then sometimes recovered a little, only to fall again. Investors experienced extreme fear and hope in a single day. Panic selling and frantic buying dominated trading floors. Emotions drove markets more than logic. The volatility showed that confidence mattered more than actual profits. People realized that the economy wasn't just about productivity, it was about trust. When trust wavered, the world's wealth seemed to vanish in hours. Everything became a nightmare. Dreams shattered. Foreclosures skyrocketed. Homes that had been a dream became nightmares. Families packed their belongings and left houses behind. Suburban streets that were once full of life became empty. Property values dropped sharply, and many owed more than their homes were worth. Mortgage lenders faced losses, and banks wrote off billions. Communities struggled. Small businesses that relied on local demand saw fewer customers. The housing collapse was not just financial, it was emotional. It changed how people thought about money and security. Then the central bank's response. Around the world, central banks acted quickly. The Federal Reserve lowered interest rates, provided emergency loans, and coordinated with banks globally. European central banks did the same. Their goal: prevent total financial chaos. These moves temporarily calmed markets. Banks had more cash, and some lending resumed. But underneath, the system remained fragile. Confidence was returning slowly, like sunlight after a storm, but the scars were visible everywhere. Many people were angry. Why rescue the banks but not families losing homes? Critics called it socializing losses and privatizing profits. Politicians defended the action, saying it was necessary to save the economy. The debate was heated. News outlets captured protests, editorials, and heated interviews. Citizens felt the system favored the wealthy. The crisis revealed a harsh truth. In a complex economy, choices made to protect the system sometimes hurt ordinary people more than powerful institutions. Then, the world global governments set into coordinating worldwide action. Not just the US governments worldwide acted. The UK, Germany, Japan, and others injected capital into banks. They guaranteed deposits. Coordinated actions prevented a total collapse of the global financial network. The crisis highlighted how interconnected economies had become. For ordinary people, the measures were invisible at first, but slowly, confidence returned. Banks reopened lending, markets stabilized slightly, and trade began flowing again. Still, the memory of panic lingered. The world had witnessed what could happen when confidence broke. Behind the scenes, complex financial tools like credit default swaps remained dangerous. Companies like AIG were on the brink of failure because they had insured too many risky loans. One domino falling could create another. The world realized the system was only partly rescued. Deep vulnerabilities remained. Financial engineers worked tirelessly to untangle exposure. Regulators learned painful lessons. Complexity hides risk. The crisis taught that invisible threats could be just as dangerous as visible ones, and understanding them was essential to prevent future disasters. Then fear gripped the world. Families struggled, but they also adapted. Communities came together, sharing resources, offering help. Children continued school, parents found temporary jobs, neighbors supported each other. The crisis showed the resilience of people, even when systems failed. The world began rebuilding. Banks stabilized, governments strengthened oversight, and investors cautiously returned. But the memory of collapse lingered. People now understood something fundamental. Financial systems rely on human trust. And when trust breaks, even the largest empires can falter. After Lehman Brothers collapsed, the shockwaves traveled across the world. Banks in Europe and Asia struggled to survive. Countries that relied on U.S. loans faced sudden shortages of cash. The interconnected web of finance showed its weakness. Suddenly, a single failure had become a global crisis. People everywhere felt it. Families worried about their savings. Businesses postponed investments. Factories slowed production. The world realized that even the largest banks could bring economies to their knees. The collapse was no longer an American problem. It was a worldwide alarm, ringing loudly for all to hear. The crisis revealed invisible connections. Banks, investors, insurance companies, and governments were tied together like a delicate web. One weak thread could break the whole system. Tools like credit default swaps and securitized mortgages hid risk inside layers of complexity. Few understood the danger. The lesson became clear. Complex systems are fragile. People trusted numbers more than reality. Confidence wasn't just a feeling. It was the glue holding the global financial network together. And when that glue started to dissolve, panic spread like wildfire. Families now faces real life's pains. As the economy faltered, ordinary people bore the brunt. Foreclosures hit record numbers. Jobs disappeared overnight. Parents struggled to feed their children. Dreams of college, homes, and security vanished in months. Anxiety became part of everyday life. Despite hardship, people adapted. Neighbors shared resources. Communities formed support groups. The human story was not just about loss, it was about resilience. Even when the financial empire shook, people continued moving forward, one small step at a time. Stock markets became extreme mirrors of human emotion. Every small rumor sent stocks plunging, then climbing, only to drop again. Traders' faces reflected panic and hope in the same breath. Investors realized markets are more about human belief than logic. This turbulence showed a fundamental truth. Economies are not machines. They are systems driven by confidence, emotion, and trust. When these break, even the largest fortunes can evaporate overnight. The world learnt the hard way. Governments strengthened financial oversight to prevent future disasters. Regulations were introduced to limit risky lending, monitor banks, and increase transparency. Central banks coordinated globally, showing that crises require cooperation. Yet, regulators realized the system was more complex than anyone had imagined. People began to see the importance of rules. While banks needed freedom to function, unchecked risk could destroy lives. The 2008 collapse became a lesson that no empire, financial, political, or social, could survive without accountability. The crisis left a mark on human psychology. People were afraid to borrow, invest, or take risks. Trust in banks and institutions eroded. Families worried for years, even after markets stabilized. The invisible damage was profound. A generation learned caution the hard way. Behind the chaos, quiet heroes worked tirelessly. Regulators, economists, and central bankers. They provided emergency loans, coordinated responses, and prevented an even greater disaster. Their work went mostly unseen by the public, but was essential to stabilizing the system. These efforts restored partial confidence. Banks reopened lending, businesses cautiously invested, and families started to recover. Even in collapse, Human ingenuity and coordination proved that systems could survive if guided with care. Patterns of collapse became known. History repeats. Looking back, the 2008 crisis fits a pattern repeated throughout history. Excess optimism, rapid growth, hidden risks, overconfidence, and sudden collapse. From tulip mania to the 1929 crash, similar lessons appear. Human behavior rarely changes, and history shows that empires of debt are always fragile. This recognition was powerful. Economists and historians realized that collapses are predictable, not random. Understanding the pattern may not prevent the next one, but it can reduce its severity. The philosophical lesson learned and rebuild begins. The deepest lesson is simple. Economies run on trust. Money itself is meaningless without confidence. When people believe in the future, systems expand. When they lose belief, everything crumbles. The 2008 crisis wasn't just about numbers, it was about human psychology and collective faith. Modern financial systems are magnificent but fragile. They function beautifully in good times, but a single event can trigger fear that spreads globally. The empire of debt is an empire built on belief, and belief is delicate. By 2010, the world began to heal. Banks recovered, regulations improved, and economies slowly stabilized. Families rebuilt lives, markets resumed growth, but the memory of collapse remained. People remembered that prosperity is fragile and trust is everything. The 2008 financial crisis showed that collapses are inevitable in complex systems. It taught humanity lessons about risk, confidence, and resilience. And it left a question for the future. When will the next cycle begin? One thing is certain: history repeats, and the next empire of debt will rise, and eventually it will face the same test. If you want to understand how the first financial bubble in history looked, watch the story of tulip mania next.